You're a specialty doctor in geriatrics, and we've just spent the past 90 minutes talking about what it means to age, what it means to age well. And I think also there's a practice that people could take from this based on a Bible study leader that you knew, and maybe gratitude practice that other people might already be doing at the moment, which is that when we think about people living better lives and manifesting, it's not that they're just thinking about living a better life. It's thinking, how do I become the person who has that life? So it's a case of visualizing and then working backwards from it. And in the example that you described of this person who's given 6 months to live based on their diagnosis, but lived for an extra, like, did you say it was 5 years in the end?
Yeah, he was, I think he was given 18 months and he ended up living 5 years after his diagnosis.
Yeah. So prayer seemed to be a factor of this longevity. And I wonder if maybe that's something we can all learn. That in that prayer, I would imagine there was like a call for another good day, one more good day. And if you're asking for that at the start, maybe you're thinking, well, how do I have a good day? What can I do to have a good day? What can I give to have a good day? And maybe that would be a great way for everybody to approach life and get a little bit more from it if they're feeling like maybe it's capped or limited in some way at the moment. What stood out for you?
The mind is a powerful organ that we underestimate. And I think we need to give more credit to our minds and not be beholden to our thoughts. It's very easy and woo-woo-y to say that, right? A lot of us are just trying to get through each day because the demands of each day are hectic. If we gave more notice to our thoughts and our expectations, we could shift more than we think we could. And that includes physical health, mental health, and just overall well-being. But it's not necessarily easy. It takes a lot of hard work, and some people have to work harder at it than others. And some people have to find ways to achieve that that's different from others. But it's possible, and our minds are more powerful when we give it credit for and more impactful to us than we, I think, really understand or appreciate. And I think the more we open our awareness to our minds, the more we can open our awareness to other things like our physical health, our mental health, our outcomes in life.
And I ribbed you a little bit at the end for being too self-effacing with sending people on to further reading or links. So you obviously have worked as a coach with people and can coach people. So I'm going to drop
Yes.
your links in the description. So definitely to anybody watching, listening, check out Ciara's links. And I'm also going to suggest some Christmas specific reading in A Christmas Carol, whether you watch the 1951 black and white film or you read Charles Dickens' book. I think, as we've described, this way of living a better life, living better days, there's a lot to be said for what can you give. So yes, it is important to save. Yes, it is important to not be frivolous all the time. But if you have the opportunity to sit down and have a meal this Christmas, these holidays, with people that you love and care about, and maybe even contribute to it in some way, whether that's with chat or food or drink, whatever it is that you can bring that can lift the mood, trust that that could have an outsized impact on everybody's quality. All right.
Beautiful.
With that, thank you very much for watching. Do like, subscribe, follow, drop a comment. Have a great Christmas. Celebrate the holidays however you're going to do it.
Just have a wonderful end to 2025 and a beautiful, blessed start to 2026. May it continue through the whole year.
Let's get into the episode. All right, Ciara, with your specialism, age is a question of mind over matter. If you don't mind, it don't matter. Do you think there's any truth to this Mark Twainism?
I'd say yes, for sure. In my work, I get obviously a range of people, and you can get people who are an old 60-something-year-old or old 70-something-year-old and a young 90-something-year-old. I definitely see the power of the mind. When people are ready to check out of life, they check out. And there is definitely a lot of power when it comes to mindset for sure. So if you've got someone who's determined, so obviously working in a rehab hospital, if someone falls and they're scared of falling again and they become a bit more timid and then they don't mobilize as much, then that can be a negative cycle towards then even more reduced mobility and being afraid to mobilize further. And then they become frailer with that cycle. Whereas if you have someone who's like, I want to get home, I don't care what it means, I'll do the stairs, I'll do whatever, and despite any nervousness around falling again, if they fell, if that's why they came in, then they tend to progress better. I mean, sometimes there is no progression. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes their body just physically can't. But mindset is a huge factor in that.
A part of what you do and not just limited by the NHS, that you want to work more broadly outside of that. And I also know about your interests, in music and in poetry. Where do you see your sense of care? Where do you see geriatric care fitting into that?
I think I'm really passionate about encouraging people to age well.
Yeah.
I think the funny thing about aging well is it really does start young, like before you even start to think about it, kind of young, because we take youth for granted, right? We're in our 20s, we're like, we're going to live forever. When we're old, that's like so far away. But actually, the decisions we make now are what impact us. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to live until you're 100, because all your people may be dead, and so life is really like quality of life is really poor. Um, but I want people to be as independent as possible for as long as possible, and I think I'm super passionate about that, and that comes with the decisions you make in life, because you can't just get to your 60s or 70s and think, oh, I've not done anything, I'll do it now. Now it'll still matter in your 60s and 70s, but it really is like a decision of over cumulative years rather than like, okay, quick U-turn, let's go in our 70s, do this. It's still beneficial, but not as beneficial if you started when you're younger. Same thing with investing. You get more bang for your buck if you start investing early. And if you left it until you're 60, you're kind of stuck. You can only do so much at that point. So I think I'm really passionate about encouraging people to age well and making decisions for that.
If we're talking about investing early,
Yeah.
and not being fully developed until we're 25, and as a guy growing up, I heard that prefrontal lobe isn't developed until 25, which means that you're not making decisions in the most mature way, the most considered way, that you're still guided by your hormones, by your youth, by this vigor and virality. And then maybe you've got 10 years of being in your prime, but then after that, it all starts to go downhill. And we talk about sarcopenia, we talk about muscle loss, we talk about bone density reducing, increased frailty. When you turn 30, it's a cliche. I've heard it so much, like, to me, as somebody who is 34, but people think I'm still late 20s. They go, "Are you really 30? Do you feel old?" So where's this come from? 2 minutes ago, you thought I was
Who's
28.
asking? How old are those people?
Well, they're in their late 20s usually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
was gonna say older people aren't asking that question.
they're not, are they? But 2 minutes
No.
ago, these people weren't worried about me. Whereas at 34, the ripe old age of 34, they think I'm going to fall apart. So I guess what I'm interested in is, when does aging start? Like, actually, if we're thinking about it from a biological, physiological perspective, before we even think about societal expectations, before we think about things like mental health and the aspersions we might have on age, you described aging there. It was similar to conversations I've had with clients about being injured. And it's the people with the mindset of I will get back up again that typically
Yes.
have better health outcomes.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. To nuance what you were saying before. So don't take me as verbatim. I'm just telling you off what I've learned, but I don't know the studies exactly. I'd have to go and find them. But we stop making collagen when we're 25. But actually, in terms of brain development, I think I heard recently that there was a study that showed that actually adolescent-minded brains occur until you're like 31 or 32, and then your adult brain is like starting. I
Mm.
don't know the nuances of that study. I've not actually read the study. It's just something I heard briefly. So it'd be something worth potentially looking into, because I thought that was really interesting. And then in terms of like metabolism, studies have shown that actually, people think, oh, when I get older, oh, I like my metabolism slows as I get older, but actually metabolism is pretty steady until you're about like 64, 65, and then it starts to slow down. And even then, it's not slowing down as much as people like give it credit for. So I think what happens more is that people move less because there's more life demands. So their job is keeping them more sedentary, or they're, growing children, families, and that keeps them more sedentary for whatever reason. They're more sore. So they're not moving as much as they used to, or it's not as much of a priority because they've got less free time on their hands. And that's probably more why people put on a bit of weight rather than the fact that literally their metabolism has slowed down. And certainly when women hit menopause and their hormones start to fluctuate, they start to hold weight more around their middle. There's a whole host of obviously experiences that women go through with menopause, that obviously we're hearing more and more about, but we've still not done enough research on women to really understand that, in comparison to men. But like, I think aging is far more nuanced. Like for instance, yesterday I was working and I was admitting patients into the acute hospital. And this 91-year-old, I went to go see him. He came with a chest infection, and because of the infection, it had thrown off his mobility. He was slipping off things and stuff. Um, and the man looked like he was 81. I looked when I first went in, I remember thinking, is this the right patient? Not look 91. And then I've had patients who were like 67, say, and they look like they're 85. And because of how they potentially they've treated their body in the years, like I when I meet 90 something year olds or 88 late 80-year-olds who are like still independent, don't have carers having to come in to help them, I'm like, that's goals right there. I want that in terms of old life. Like that is what I'm working towards right now in my late 30s. That is what I'm working towards. I want to be able to wipe my own bum. I want to make my own cup of tea. I want to get myself out of bed or out of a chair. I don't want to be stuck relying on other people to help me. Sometimes things happen. And obviously, if someone falls and injures themselves and they're older, it is really hard to build that muscle back up again. They lose it a lot faster than they can make it. And having broken my leg when I was 30 and it taking me a couple years to even get that muscle mass back, and I lost it in 10 days like that, like the size of my thigh halved within 10 days of breaking my leg because I couldn't mobilize. And that's at 30. And it took me a couple years to build that back up again. And obviously, since then, I've really focused on my mobility because it sucked not being able to go to the bathroom on my own. It sucked having to have my mom help me wash myself. Like, and it was a glimpse of what potentially old age could be in the future, as well as obviously me seeing it all the time with patients that I work with. I don't want that for myself. Like, if I can avoid it, I want to be independent. I want to be able to putter around my house when I'm 90. And even if I can't leave the house, I can take myself to the toilet. I can wipe my own bum. I can, like, you know, get myself into bed, wash myself. To me, that is so important and such life goals because I think as you get older, their lives get smaller and smaller and smaller just because they're not able to do as much. It's just the nature of getting old. So many old people have said to me, getting old is such a nuisance. And it is. Like, you can't escape it. Like, but how well you age is down to choices you make in your life. And I think, um, if you smoke a lot, if you drink a lot, if you are out super late and not getting a good bedtime routine regularly, like it's okay every now and again. Of course, you have to live your life. No one wants to live their life having just stayed in a bubble their whole lives. Like that's silly and not what I'm saying. I just mean, if 80% of the time you're giving your body good nutrition and feeding it well and not drinking tons of alcohol or doing a bunch of drugs, especially as you get older. Like I get 20s experimenting, being an adult and figuring out who you want to be in life and go for it, travel, you know, be up all night, like live life to the fullest, but also be mindful that you can't carry that on as you get older because no, you get too tired. But also it will have its repercussions. I saw a 51-year-old yesterday too who had florid heart failure, 51, like, or 52, but his life will be super limited because he'll get short of breath, and taking these water tablets to help offload his heart will mean then his kidneys get knocked and he'll age much quicker then because he's now got heart failure and it's a chronic condition. It's not going to go away. You can't make your heart better. And he will probably have a much shorter life than someone who made more consistent, healthier decisions in their younger years. I forget where we started, but
Did you know that each episode of Fitness and Thinking takes about 10 hours to put together? If you've enjoyed them, then I've got a favour to ask of you. It's not your money. It is just a second to like what you like. Maybe a couple of seconds to leave a comment on what you enjoyed, what you changed, what you might have asked the guests, and maybe to ask me to bring on somebody or to discuss a topic that you're interested in.
It'll be in Greek mythology at some point that one of the gods was granted eternal life, but not eternal quality of life. And had to see themselves age and had to feel themselves become a version of themselves that they wouldn't have wanted to be. When we think maybe of zombie horror, and in it was a PlayStation game originally called Horizon, you had these biohackers try to figure out how to live forever. And in the sequel of it, you find that one of them has survived the apocalypse and 1,000 years later is still living, but still living in a lockdown bunker. And the thing that they've become for living 1,000 years. And yeah, that it's pure horror what that could be. I would much rather be here for a good time than a long time, to use a kind of
A cliche saying.
A cliche thing.
On dating apps, here for a good time, not a long time. Whenever I saw those guys on dating apps, I was like, nope.
No, see you later. Yeah, and I get it, but I guess also having seen older people in my families who haven't had a good quality of life, it kind of makes me more inclined to say that. What you've described of, not smoking, drinking less, reducing the amount of late nights, you and I are both for the idea of experimenting in your 20s, but knowing that in your 30s and maybe when your adult brain has developed, there is a normal shift towards being an adult and changing responsibilities and changing energy, as you described. You've said to cut down on things or to not do things. What can we actively do, though, to increase our quality of lives? What can we actively do to maybe boost quality and quantity of life, so to speak?
Building muscle, having muscle bulk will be so helpful for so many reasons. For instance, you hold sugar stores, glycogen stores in your muscle. A lot of it first goes to your liver, and then once those are filled, they go to your muscles. If you don't have muscles, where does it get stored? As adipose tissue, fatty tissue. If you have more muscle, you've got more cells that can use that energy well. So muscle, especially in women too, it helps with like glucose control, sugar control. So if say you're looking at someone who's got like PCOS or endometriosis, so chronic conditions that can be really debilitating for a woman, having more muscle means that there's more control, glucose control overall. Like it helps with glucose intolerance because there's then more muscle can absorb and store that sugar for later when it needs to use it when you're activating your muscles. Also, the more muscle you have, the better you are going into old age. Because if you think about it, you've got a frail 80-something-year-old who doesn't have muscle. They fall, they lose that muscle so quickly. Already they've lost muscle because they're getting older, and that just happens naturally, just is the way it is as we age. But if they've got muscle bulk going into their 70s and 80s and they fall, they've got more for their body to eat off of as they're immobile until they can start mobilizing again, and more to work with when they start to rehab. Whereas if you don't have that muscle bulk, your sugar control isn't as good. If genetically you're predisposed to poor sugar control as you get older, not everyone obviously has that genetic predisposition, but also you're more likely to rehab. So take, for instance, a colleague her mom's in her 70s, super active with dogs and stuff. 70s is not old, by the way, in my opinion. Especially if you're good 70s, like to me, you're still middle-aged, baby age, which I know to some people might seem bizarre, but when you have my cohort of patients, 70s is like, you're a baby still. And she recently had a medical emergency that was unpredictable. You wouldn't have known. And that happens, right? As we get older, our bodies are aging, things can happen. We develop diseases that we have no control over sometimes, like a cancer or diverticular disease, which is like outpouchings of your colon. I mean, sometimes it can be decisions in life, but ultimately this woman, for instance, was a fit and healthy 70-something-year-old, and she had this medical emergency, unexpected, ended up in intensive care, and then had surgery, ended up back in intensive care, like quite a bit of a roller coaster week or two, which was terrifying. However, I think she's now home, and this is only a few weeks after being sick, but because she had a good baseline, functional baseline, she will probably recover really well. If you take the same person who has been a chronic drinker or just an excessive drinker, most people don't realize how much they're drinking. They think, oh, this is enough, 2-3 glasses of wine a night, every night. It's fine. It's not fine. It's too much. you know, maybe max 5 glasses of wine, depending on how big your glass is, a week. You know, it's not that much that really we should be um, ingesting, or say like a drinker, or say a lot of your diet is processed. Take that same person who's not as active, who's, you know, has an IT job, quite sedentary, and then the same thing, same kind of medical emergency happens to them. It might take longer for them to recover, and they may not get back to the same function that they were before. Now, I don't know if this colleague of mine's mom's going to recover and get back to the same function that she was before, but she's more likely to than someone who's made different life choices.
Mm.
And having that muscle bulk is one of those aspects, and one of the biggest things that I think is so important when it comes to aging well. You won't regret having it. And I know, especially as women, you get fed this line of like, oh, if you have muscles, you're bulky, it's gross, like cardio, cardio, cardio. But actually, for even good health now, like say a woman has PCOS or endometriosis, having muscle is only beneficial. It's only going to benefit them as they get older, as they're learning about their bodies. Like that, I think, is probably the biggest thing. And I try to get my parents to do it. My mom doesn't like being sweaty, so it's really hard to get her to like exercise. So I'm like, Mom, do you want to be able to wipe your own bum? You're not going to want someone, if you're mentally with it and someone else is having to wipe your bum, or you like to sit in a pad and poo yourself or pee yourself and wait for a carer to come and wipe you a few hours later, no one's gonna, like, you wouldn't want that. Like, I mean, I wouldn't want that for someone with dementia either, but sometimes that's the way it ends up happening. And whereas if you have that muscle and you do have a fall, you're more likely to recover well than you would otherwise. You know, when I've got like an 80-something-year-old who's like, well, yeah, no, I still go to like exercise classes, even if it's not that intense, right? They just go to an exercise class or a water aerobics class. It's still beneficial than doing nothing at all. Or even if someone goes on, oh, I walk 2 miles a day, that still, you notice the difference in the state of them as they're trying to recover, you know, no matter what the like reason why they fell or broke something or were septic and ended up in hospital for a few weeks, you know, whatever the case may be, it absolutely plays a huge part in how well they recover.
There are, I think, maybe 5 points. I'm going to push myself to respond in 5 ways to what you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first one being that increased muscle mass, as far as I've been taught, certainly on my courses as a PT and doing more study for strength and conditioning, but then also thinking about psychology, mental health, and physical health, that more muscle mass typically results in greater bone density. Yeah. So we're talking about a more robust body, typically with more muscle. Now, when we talk about one of the biggest kind of killers for older people, it is that fall that you describe, either directly or indirectly. If you've got more muscle mass, then potentially you don't break something when you fall because you've got a little bit more tissue around the joint. Maybe also, though, you've got better coordination so that if you fall in a better way. And so actually,
yeah, it's probably more itself,
that. Yeah, so the fall itself actually does less damage, potentially. Yeah. The third bit was on people growing older and maybe blaming their hormones for putting on weight, rather than thinking, am I moving less while eating the same amount, or am I moving less and eating more, therefore causing weight gain? We know that calories in, calories out, as much as it might bore people to tears, it is just a thermodynamic equation. You can't cheat thermodynamics as far as we're aware. If you eat more than you need, you will put on weight, and it doesn't matter what age you are. That is as close to a fact as we've got. Hormones can impact, but it's not to do necessarily with your hormones. It's, are you eating too much for the amount you're moving or the amount that you're metabolizing? Yeah.
There's nuance to that, but yes.
Okay. Help me out with the nuance after this one.
Yeah.
PCOS is, from what I understand, a manageable to difficult diagnosis for people to receive and to experience. But one of the potential silver linings, so to speak, of PCOS is the increased ability to put on muscle. So actually, if you're thinking about increasing longevity or increasing the quality of life, you may be better predisposed to put on muscle, which we know can improve those things. And so rather than beating yourself up with cardio and feeling like what you're doing isn't working, change your style of training. look to lift weights, look to build muscle. And ultimately, muscle takes up less space than fat for the same amount of volume. So far from being bulky, a 75 kilo person will look smaller than a 75 kilo person, muscle versus fat. That's just the way that it goes. In the same clothes, this person might look a little bit fitter, but they're going to look smaller relative to this person who is mostly fat. Go for your nuance, Ciara, when it comes to hormones and aging.
So in terms of women's health, again, this is something I think that needs to be studied more. But in terms of, it says like take someone my age, right? If you are not eating enough or eating enough of the right things to aid and reduce, like, say, inflammation in the body, it can cause you to hold on to weight. So yes, there's a calories out. Like if you're eating 3,000 calories a day, you're going to put weight on, like that. Yes, absolutely. But there could be a nuance between, like, say you're trying to lose weight and you're counting your macros and you're doing 2,000 calories versus 1,800 calories. And you can't lose weight at 1,800, but you up them to 2,000 and you start to lose weight, because there's a nuance of like your body might be trying too hard and there might be a bit of inflammation that is causing issues with how you're able to lose weight. And especially if, like, something I'm learning even myself. So I put on weight really quickly, like 10 pounds. And I was like, why am I putting on weight? I'm fitting in my clothes the same. I just feel inflamed. I don't understand. And I wasn't eating consistent calories every day. So I wasn't being consistent with my macros. So one day I'd have 1,600, one day I'd have 2,000, one day I'd have 1,800, one day I'd have 2,100. And the minute I went to a regular 2,000 a day, I was really being mindful and counting my macros, making sure it was enough protein. It was 2,000 a day. I wasn't underfeeding my body. I lost like 4 pounds really quickly. And I'm still on that journey. I'm still figuring it out. And obviously once I steady state my body, and this is, I think, for a lot of women, once I steady state my body and it can go, okay, we don't have to like freak out as much. We don't have to store as much. Like I can let go of some of this, then some of the weight can come off a bit more easily. But if you put your body into an inflamed state, same thing if, like, you could be hitting your macros, right? Be hitting your calories that you're wanting to hit for the day. But if you're overtraining, if you're not getting enough sleep, your body's going to be in an inflamed state. And I think for guys, it's a lot easier. You're not as impacted as much because your hormones, men, it's a daily cycle, women, it's a 28-day cycle. So there's fluctuations throughout the month, and it can impact how, not necessarily, I think some of it's mindset of like how you can train and stuff. But I think it's important in terms of women's health that those things do impact. And I think women are just more sensitive to those because of such a variation of hormones in the month. Whereas a man can kind of get away with more, which is, I think, why men are able to lose weight more easily than a woman is, why women should be at a higher body fat percentage than men, that sort of thing. I think, so that's why I'm saying it's a bit nuanced. Obviously, if we're talking about old age, less so of a factor, especially if you're talking about women that are definitely postmenopausal, like menopause has come and gone. They are now fully postmenopausal. It's a totally different story, like totally different thing we're talking about. But if we're talking about someone who's in their fertile years, I think that's something to think about and be mindful of as a woman. Men have to think about it, very lucky, have to think about it much less. I think they can get away with more of like having a variable calorie intake, having variable sleep, having less. I'm not saying they can totally. I'm just saying less so than a woman. A woman's body might be more sensitive to irregularities with that than a man's would. So that's where I'm saying there's a bit of nuance, I think, to it.
I don't think any of that's unfair. I would support a lot of what you're saying, but also from a coaching perspective. Like, I know that you're into your fitness. I know that you're into lifting weights. I've got so many data points now. Like, I've got multiple thousands data points of people checking in with their days and their weeks. And I know that people lie.
Yeah.
I know that people
to themselves first and then to
themselves
you.
first and then to me.
Yeah.
And I know that it's really tempting to think that we are doing everything right, so to speak. So if we say that we are losing weight, say that we are in a calorie deficit, the only way you're in a calorie deficit is if you're losing weight generically. The inflammation bit is so important. What you're talking about there, from my understanding of it, is water retention and hormones, carbs, salt. how hard you trained, more like the recency to training that you weighed yourself, how much sleep you got before you weighed yourself. All of these things can impact your weight, which is why I get everybody to weigh themselves at the same time every day. So this will be when they wake up, they go to the toilet, do their ablutions, don't take on any liquid, don't take on any food, and we take an average over 7 days. If your weight has changed over the average, so 7 days compared to 7 days, then that's what we're looking at. But day to day, we can have so much variance.
Yes, yeah.
That it's almost meaningless to weigh yourself randomly through a week if weight loss is your goal. And I think in part it's almost meaningless because people get in their heads, they go, well, I did everything right, but I put on 2 kilos. So obviously it's my hormones, rather than necessarily, did you have a curry the night before and did you eat rice and a naan? It doesn't necessarily matter how many calories you weigh if over the course of a week you're balanced, but that meal could have so many carbs and salt in that you don't normally have that you
that you put on that weight the next day. Yeah.
Exactly that. So I think there is an element of people don't understand their bodies that goes into it.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think there's also an element of it's easier to use terminology that we don't understand to describe a thing that we can't control or feel we can't control, rather than put in the work of tracking for 7 days and then tracking for 14 days, if you know what I mean. And even though it feels monotonous and clinical, understanding your body from this numerical perspective, then also I have found has helped me and my clients become kinder to ourselves over time.
Yeah.
Because we can say, okay, cool. Yes, of course. When I went for that night out, I was a little bit heavier the next day, but did I enjoy that night out? Yeah. Am I a bad person for having that night out? No. Would I not have that night out again if I were given the option? I probably would have it because it was amazing and it made me feel good about life.
Yeah.
And actually the next week, you know, because I had that big night out, I didn't need the same things that I was craving in the lead up to that night. And so actually I'm less inflamed and I'm slightly happier for it. And I've just seen those photos that Gary put up, and you know, we all look like we're having a great time, you know. So I am better for having that experience, and that's positively impacted my life. So yeah, there's loads going on when it comes to that. I think weight loss is so misunderstood. It's something that everybody could benefit from help with, just like I benefit from help from Spanish teachers, from surf instructors, from my mates who can actually ski when I end up at the top of a mountain and I've not got any insurance. How I got down it in one piece, I don't know.
You're a brave man.
Yeah. Oh, it's stupid.
Without insurance.
Very, very stupid in that case. We don't know everything, and it's all right to not know everything. A discussion for an aging body, but for anybody that's living, and I guess anybody that is living is aging by the very virtue of the way that we perceive time. I wonder, Ciara, if we can kind of roll from that. When do you think aging starts mentally or societally? You described 70-year-olds as young, as spring chickens almost. Like, what do you think it is? Obviously, in your job, you will be more sensitive to a young 70-year-old than maybe I would looking at an older population. So maybe it's a two-parter. When do you think societally we are old and or aging? And to your mind, when in your population do you think people are old? And I wonder, is it an age or is it the mindset that we were alluding to at the start of the conversation?
So in terms of society, I think that people get disregarded very quickly. And I think it's also different for genders. So I think women are deemed older from a younger age than men. Just, you know, it's the way I don't know. I don't agree, but obviously women are disregarded the minute they're out of their 20s, even like mid 20s. I think women are seen to be old. And then obviously if they hit like menopause age, like 40s, 50s, they're deemed like super old. You know, if you think about like when people are like, oh my God, I can't believe she's still getting roles. That's so great. And she's like in her 50s or 60s. And you're like, she's still so young. Like, I mean, she's not young for a 20-year-old, but like in terms of life, she still has this super amount of life left. Like, and especially if women don't use like Botox and fillers, which I like being someone who is so anti those things, but so tempted by them as well. Like I get it. I get the societal constant, like, you must look like this, you must look like this. Then the minute you look old, you know, no one's interested in you. In terms of like the music industry, someone yesterday, they heard I did music and they listened to some of my music. They're like, oh my God, you're so good. Like, why are you doing this job? And I'm like, well, I'm in my late 30s. Like, I don't think the music industry is interested in me, not as an artist. maybe as a songwriter, maybe, but because I don't know anyone now, like no one's going to give a crap about me at this age. I know I don't look my age, but I like the minute someone would find out my late 30s, they'd be like, nah. And I think, which is insane when I think I've not even lived half my life, hopefully. Um, whereas I think in terms of a medical way of things, whereas I think men like age well. Like for instance, George Clooney, he just got more and more celebrated as he got older, and now I think he looks a bit old. But so I think there's definitely a different definition to like societal old and then like medical old. Medical old, I mean, technically, if someone is, I think 75 or 80, in terms of like if they come into hospital because they need to be admitted, they will be seen by the elderly care physicians rather than like the normal physicians or like the younger physicians, right? But then that is nuanced. So if you've got like a 70-year-old who's in a care home because they've got advanced dementia, which is unfortunate, then they're old. They're frail. They're a frail older person is really how I'd put it. Whereas if you have like an 85-year-old who has a chest infection and obviously just knocked them off their feet, but they're a good 85-year-old, like say their baseline is, they're able to wash and dress themselves. They don't have any carers. They're able to go do their own shopping, like they walk to the shops. To me, that's a young 85-year-old. And I know it sounds really funny and weird, but when someone comes in to hospital, there's something called the Rockwood Frailty Score. And it essentially looks at, you get a different score of 1 to 7, I think it is. And it's basically like, can you wash and dress yourself? Do you need help with like keeping the house clean? Basically, how frail are you? And if I've got an 85-year-old with a score of 3, to me, they're like really good. Like that's the kind of 85-year-old I want to be. Whereas you can get a 70-year-old who's got a score of 7 and they've got a form in the community that says don't resuscitate them because their quality of life is poor now. If they were to basically medically die, their heart would stop beating. You're not gonna like, and they're frail. Resuscitating them is not going to be a benefit because there's no way they'd ever get back to the quality of life they started with, and that was poor to begin with. So it's there's like a cutoff in terms of like a technical, like, oh, if this person's come in, they're 75, they really should go to the elderly care physician. But actually within that, you get a huge variety of people that I would say like is a young old person, or this is an old young person. And again, it's down to how people have decided to live their lives, or the unfortunate circumstance of sometimes things just happen to people and out of their control. And it's not because they did this or did that in life necessarily. It's because their genetics are unfortunately this way, and this is what they've ended up with. Like say someone gets breast cancer, it's not their fault, especially if they've got the genetic gene for it, the BRCA gene. It's not their fault, but because they needed chemo and radiotherapy at 75 years old, it's increased their frailty a lot. Versus somebody who's been very fortunate and is on no medications and is 85. So it's nuanced in terms of deeming something who's old, who's not. But like the 91-year-old I saw yesterday, I was like, you must be a really good like 91-year-old. Like, sure, you're 91, but like you're probably pretty good when you're not sick. And like I had a 91-year-old earlier this year who had a fall because he was playing his PlayStations. It's also a mindset. Yes, there is a physical aspect of it, right? Like some people are really unfortunate. Like I have a patient who's had 3 different types of cancer. What decisions he made in his life that may have contributed to that, I don't know. And maybe it was just unfortunate circumstances. Genetically, some people, are pro-inflammatory, bad at detoxing their bodies, like getting rid of free radicals that we all have when stuff is being broken down in our bodies. And some people have better genetics in that regard. Or you could have someone who's got dementia, who's got no other problems, but has no capacity and doesn't know where they are ever, doesn't recognize their family, can still walk around. Like again, the other day I was at work and this man, he must have been, I don't know, in his 80s. He didn't know what personal space was. He'd come up on you like this and be like, oh, do you know who Janet is? Is Janet here? I'd be like, no, Janet's not here. And be like, well, that was quick. How'd you know that? And he obviously had a fall because he had a black eye, but like he was a good 80-something-year-old, like, but dementia, completely independent with his mobility, but obviously has dementia. From my personal idea of like what's old in medicine is very variable, and it really depends on your function in life and your frailty in life, and that massively impacts how old you are.
The last thing is to subscribe if you haven't already. Most people will watch an episode, maybe watch a couple in a row, but not subscribe. And yet that could be a massive sign to all those algorithms that you are interested in what fitness and thinking is all about. So that's it. You don't need to send any money my way. I'm not asking for a cent or penny or peso from you.
There's something to be said for our societal narratives on how old people are as well. So obviously pension age keeps being bumped up and up. Still, relative to the start of the century, people are living a lot longer than they used to be. And obviously if people are retired for a little bit longer, the question that I'm trying to form, it feels to me that when people retire, typically their outcomes are worse because of things that we've already discussed, that they stop moving. Maybe they lose a sense of purpose. Work, even if it was banal, gave them a reason to get up. There was structure, there was routine. And when people don't have a signpost, when people don't have something to aim for, then maybe we start to see some degradation in terms of sense of self, sense of worth, physical health, mental health, spiritual health. When we think about societies that live longer, so the blue zone places like Sardinia and I think it's Okinawa in Japan, typically what goes on there is that there is connection and fish and walking up hills. And maybe we can come on to that in a little bit. But I wonder if initially we talk about the notion that if we tell somebody that they're old, they will become old or they will act older than they might otherwise. So I think the study is Langer, where people were treated as capable or they were treated as fragile in different diagnostic tests. And the people who were told that they were capable typically outperformed the people who were told that they were fragile. And I think these conditions have been reversed as well. And I've seen this in a different study of metabolism, where two groups were formed based on the assumption that they had a specific genetic adaptation that allowed them to better blow off carbon dioxide in stress tests. You had people with the gene, like actually found to have this gene that actually has this impact on cardiovascular performance, and people who didn't have the gene. But in these two groups, there were subsets, people who had the gene and were told that they had the gene and told what that meant. And then people who had the gene but were told that they didn't have it and told what that meant. And then in this group, people who didn't have the gene were told that they had the gene. And then people who didn't have the gene were told that they didn't have the gene. Everybody knew what the gene meant. And the people who had the gene told they had the gene, and the people who didn't have the gene but told they had the gene. You with me so far?
Yeah.
All performed better than people who were told that they didn't have the gene, including those who had the gene. If you think that you're being given something that is going to improve your outcomes further to any effort that you put in, that your outcomes will be better. So there's something to be said about what we're told, because what we're told could impact our decisions, but then also have a further effect because we change our behaviors, our patterns to become the person who has this advantage, if you know what I mean. So we then actually manifest the advantage.
When people think one thing, even though they're in the placebo group or not, right? It absolutely has an impact. If I think there was a study done, and again, I don't have specific names like you do, so good on you for having specific names. But there was a study done where you get people that are pessimistic and optimistic, and you get them to walk through the same path of like various things that are on the ground. Say, you take an optimistic person and they'll see like the change on the ground, whereas an pessimistic person won't. And I've seen, in terms of relating it back to like old people, I have seen people check out, like they're done, they don't want to be here anymore. And I've seen them die, like understandably. I mean, you can't just like decide at 65, oh, I'm going to die, and then just suddenly die. Like you have to stop eating, obviously, and stuff. But if you take an 88-year-old, say, and they've got a bit of dementia, and they're like, you know what, I'm done. I'm good. I've had enough life. Like, I'm happy. There is a difference. Like mindset is so important. And that's what I was saying earlier about You know, if you've got somebody who is like, well, I may have fallen, but I'm going to get back up again. And I want to go home. I want to go home. Or some who like don't want to go home, or they're scared or whatever. And then they don't invest in rehabbing as much because they're scared. It absolutely affects their outcome for sure. And mindset is hugely important no matter what age you are, right? If you think about people who manifest, it's not just that they thought, oh, I want to win a car, and then all of a sudden the car shows up. No, it's that they imagined what version of me gets that car. And then they kind of work backwards in terms of how do I get to be that person? And you end up seeing opportunities you wouldn't normally have seen had you not had that mindset of like, how do I become this person that owns this car or this house or has this job? It's totally about mindset. And even so recently, my dad got diagnosed unexpectedly with a condition. Well, not unexpectedly, I kind of saw it, but still was a bit of a shock to hear it officially. And my mom's like, well, I don't know if you can do that now. And my dad's like, I've not suddenly become disabled. And it's so true. Like, because the minute you hear, oh, this diagnosis, you think, oh God, what about this? What about that? But he's no different than the hour before he was diagnosed to now. Like, it's maybe over time things will progress because that's the condition he's been diagnosed with. It's progressive diagnosis. But I also believe mindset is so important. And this is where medicine, I think, probably like, if you get diehard like science people, they're like, well, it's just that's the way it is. Whereas I'm like, or, you know, we're going to believe for a miracle, as in like, we're going to believe that we're going to have the best potential outcome possible. You know, I knew somebody when I was in high school. I went to a Bible study, class. No, not class. That makes it sound really official. Group. When I was a kid in high school, and the leaders of this like youth group, I was living in France at the time, and they were from the States. And anyway, they ended up moving back, and they were young, I think in their 50s, these people. And the husband got diagnosed with a glioblastoma, which is the most aggressive form of brain cancer you can get. And usually you only get 6 months. The minute you find it, it's because it's pressing on something and kind of far gone. And he was given, I think, a year, maybe 18 months. He lived for 5 years after his diagnosis. And, you know, I've told this to people before, and they were like, do you think, you know, like, why do you think he lived long? I think it's because they prayed and they believed for a miracle. It didn't stop the inevitable, that because you're like, I want to believe in miracles. I want to believe in healing. I hear about it all the time. I've never seen it. You hear stories, obviously, of like these wonderful outcomes for people. But my science brain goes, well, the majority of people, the inevitable is the inevitable. But it doesn't mean that mindset can't impact that in some way positively. So like this man lived for 5 years instead of 18 months. And science is an imperfect thing, right? You know, no doctor gets it right entirely every time. But to live 5 years with a glioblastoma is pretty impressive. And I do think that it was the belief that there could be a different outcome that impacted and gave their family more time together than expected. And you end up cherishing more of that time because you never know when it'll be your last time, right? Ultimately, he succumbed to his disease. But it's the same, I believe, for like my dad. I believe that their mindset is a huge thing. If you believe, oh, well, that's it, you know, I guess this is it, then you can go downhill faster. You can become frailer faster. And I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. I think you can have the mindset of, okay, I've got this diagnosis. How do I make this the best potential outcome as possible? And I think that's the mindset my dad's getting into. And I think we have to follow along because, like you say, you don't want to treat people like, oh, well, you soft this and cotton wool that, because then you make them frailer. And, you know, people say, oh, I'm too old to do this. Why? Why are you too old to do this? And my mom would say, I'm too old to go to the gym. No, you're not. Like, you have a body that moves. Just because you may do something different than something I might do doesn't mean you're too old to go to the gym. In fact, go to the gym, like do what you can and build the muscle you can while you can, because you're going to want it if you have a fall, or if you get sick or in hospital, your body's going to want that to feed off of, and you'll recover better. I'm so passionate about it. And it's something I still work on myself, and in different aspects of my life, not just the physical health side of things. I like to believe it could be better. I want it to be better. What does better look like for me? Because it's going to be different for everybody. And how do I get there, even close to it? Or what do I discover along the journey of trying to get to that better place for myself? What do I discover about myself, or what I actually want? Do I discover well, maybe that's not actually what I wanted. I wanted this instead. And yeah, I just think it's such a positive thing to do that also positively impacts your physical health as well, and mental health.
I think it makes sense that you say Bible study leader would pray. I'm fairly secular in my views. I think there is importance to belief, whatever that looks like. I think belief's huge for outcomes and for the reasons that you described. One aspect of secular prayer that maybe I do is gratitude practice. So before I go to sleep, I kind of run through what I'm thankful for in the day. So it might be as simple as, I had a really good conversation with my housemate. I'm really thankful for the food that we had and the work that I got to do with my clients. Really simple. And it's just as simple as I am thankful for, and then these three things. I don't need to tell those people. I don't need to journal it. I don't need to do anything other than just feel it for what has happened. And anecdotally, I've not got like blood serum samples or synovial fluid markings or anything like this. But I think in the 2 years or so that I've been doing this, less inflammation, better recovery, a general better appreciation for life and for things. I find it easier to be thankful as a result of being thankful. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think you have to have a faith. I think that's my way of understanding the world. But I think people who meditate, it's the same thing as prayer. It's the same thing as gratitude practice. I think we're tapping into that same energy place. It's how I understand it, but it doesn't. So I'm not saying that to like alienate or isolate, if you don't have a faith, the things aren't going to happen. No, I think it's a mindset thing is outside of a faith, outside of a religion. Like it's a mindset. It's a, gratitude mindset is the same as like a prayer mindset. I think it's how the energy you output, like, if you think about athletes, right? They've got, psychologists specifically for athletes where they help them get into the mindset and envision what it's like to win and go through every single step. What does that look like? What are you feeling? Feel the wind on you go past you as you like run that 100 meters. What do your feet feel like on the ground? Like you go into the nitty gritty of it and what that vision looks like of the outcome you're wanting to achieve. Because if you can't imagine it, how can you get yourself there? And I think part of that journey is being grateful for whatever it is in your life, for the day, for the, that helps you get to that place. And mindset is a huge part of that. And the brain doesn't know the difference. When people are feeling anxious, right? Their brain is telling them there's a tiger out in the garden. You've got to run, right? Fight or flight. Your brain doesn't know the difference. Whereas if you tell yourself, it's okay. There's no actual tiger in the garden. We are safe. It's okay. You can relax. I've got you. And you ground yourself. You go like with the lights. Let's see the lights. Let's see the white walls. Whatever way you need to do that. I feel the ground underneath my feet to ground yourself. Your brain doesn't know the difference. So if you envision yourself like doing the thing you want to achieve, like I envision myself, investing in this and making this much for my future, then it's more likely to be possible than it was if I didn't. I may not achieve that specific goal in the end, or it may divert and change as my priorities change in life. But ultimately, how is it I want to feel? How do I want my life to look? Those are super important factors for longevity and like good health in later in life. And like what you're saying about like the blue zones and things, connection is a huge part of what impacts frailty later in life and poorer outcomes or not. So if you think about it, in Sardinia, in Okinawa, where there are blue zones, and other places where there are blue zones, community is a huge part of that. And I think, if you take most general people in like England, the US, wherever, you've got people really disconnected from their families. We don't look after our elderly as much as we used to. They get put in care homes, or carers can look after them because their lives are so busy, because the demands of life mean that it makes it really hard. Or if we live even 2 hours away, it's hard to go see them or look after them, and it requires sacrifice then if we have to like go move to be with them or move them up to us, or that sort of thing. But it has a huge impact. Like, I think, I don't know the studies, but I'm pretty sure there's a study where like they had like looked at older people around their grandchildren and the outcomes that it had on the grandchildren and the older person, like the grandparents, versus not. And of course, there's a positive impact on older people connecting with the really young, and also being in community. Having purpose still impacts quality of life. And I think it impacts frailty. If you've got somebody sitting at home alone all day, and the only time they see someone is for 10 minutes with a carer who's come to wipe their bottom, change their pad, and then leave again, and then they're just left sitting there again, like, who the flip wants that? Like, and some people, that's just the way it is. And some people would rather die than to continue that quality of life. And I certainly wouldn't want that. I have to say, a privilege of mine was to be a part of the last 2 years of my grandmother's life. I moved in with my parents to help look after her, and also to save money for myself. Like, I'm not going to say I'm some martyr, right? I also did it to be closer to London, things like that. And I'm so grateful I had that with her, because what an honor it is to get to hear their stories and get to care for them. And I hope I can do the same somehow for my folks. I mean, it's difficult because we live in different countries, but like, it really does have an impact on if you're socializing, if you're connecting with others. It's so important, because if you don't have purpose, like you were saying, then what are you living for? If you're just sitting at home, of course it's going to increase your frailty, because you kind of check out more and more and more.
I was in Sardinia 4 years ago. My partner at the time invited me out to the mountains, and it was amazing. Nonna was making pasta. We got to make ciadas with her. I learned enough Italian to ask for more dessert, which I think she appreciated. My then girlfriend's dad got some game, I think hunted some rabbit, and brought that food back. Like, everybody contributed to this big meal. Meals were a big, big thing. And it was a lot of fun to be among. And I got absolutely ripped for my use of cutlery. I'm not going to say the specific thing that I did. I'm devastated that it happened. That's all you need to know. But to feel that meal times were important, and people of different ages would come by on their scooters. It didn't matter that they had to drive up into the mountains. You reported in for lunchtime and for the big meal in the evening, and everybody brought something, whether it was food or drink or chat. Everybody could play a part, and to be a part of that was amazing. And I can see the joy in life there. Dickens' depiction of a guy who is tight and has this life that is stingy and cold. He's old and he will live for a long time. But when he's shown a future of keeping on living for the future without joy in the present, without investing in the people around him, without actually having any outward connection, it looks painful. It looks miserable. It's that 1,000-year existence. What's it all for? And even though at the end of the film, the end of the book, it can feel like, as if he's made this big change, that's not going to last. It's all just too much. It's all too fictionalized. The joy that Scrooge feels and the investment that he puts in and people don't expect of him, it's satisfying as a payoff. Everybody melts. Everybody becomes warmer. Everybody is happier in that moment. And if that happiness were to, last for longer than that moment, and it's multi-generational, it's the grandkids, it's the kids, I think if more people invested in their moments with people, they would live longer. So it's, again, a thing for me of quality of life. Like, make these moments like Christmas count, the holidays, whatever it is that you celebrate. If there's food and people coming together, be in it.
Yeah.
Because I think it is this that makes people live longer. It doesn't matter what you're eating, whether it's a curry or a dry turkey. Somebody at the door there, maybe a present. It's the act of giving and the act of being among others leads to a better quality of life. And that just seems to be shown throughout, whether it's a book that was written 150 years ago, or it's East Asian practices that we've been aware of forever, or, you know, what we're starting to learn at the end of 2025 in the West, relearn it, you know, as a thing. Yeah, I think there's some salience there. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, I think about all the times where you've connected with somebody, like that magical feeling of like that you walk away feeling that was so good. Like I'm so happy that you know, there are times when you're tired, right? And you're like, oh, the last thing I want to do is socialize. Then you go and do it. And then you're like, oh, I'm really glad I did that actually. Like it's meaningful, or, you know, to make someone smile, to give of yourself, you know, it takes more muscles in your face to frown than it does to smile. I think you get more return on giving to others, whether it's your time or whatever it is, right? Than to take for yourself. Because, you know, if you think about the like society we're in at the moment, right? There's this like consumerism, and people can have more and more and more and more, but they're still not happy. Like you think about, say, take the Kardashians, right? They have all the money in the world, yet they keep getting all this plastic surgery. They keep getting divorces. Like, I feel for them. That's horrible. I don't, you know, they're living up to the standard that society has set for them. And I'm sure they're not bad people at their core. Maybe they are. I don't know them. But like, they're still seeking out to fill a void, because how I don't think a happy person would feel the need to get all this stuff done to their body. Like, don't get me wrong. As I get older and I see the wrinkles appear, and like the like plushiness of my youth goes away as my collagen fades, right? I am so tempted to give into the filler thing and the Botox thing. But is that really going to make me happy? No, because the bar will then probably just adjust. Here goes my finger. The, the bar will just adjust to something else, because actually I'm not dealing with the root problem. And whereas when you have like human connection, it's like all those things don't matter as much. All the noise of the world doesn't matter as much. And I think it's the same, you know, like some of the most beautiful moments in my life are connection with people, or connection with the earth, right? Being in nature and seeing the beauty of the world rather than staying in my little protected bubble. Like, it's exploring, it's expanding, it's pushing myself a little bit more beyond my comfort zone. It's connecting with others. Like, that's where the beauty of life is. You may not fix your problems. You may still struggle to pay your bills, but you can change your mindset around that. I'm grateful that this, or I'm grateful that that, you know, I still have these people in my life. Life is tough for a lot of people. So many things to be grateful for amongst all the difficulties of life, wherever you're at in the social hierarchy or the financial hierarchy, or wherever you're at, whatever life circumstances you started with are currently in coming your way. Like, I think it really is about how you mentally navigate through it as well. You know, like, if you don't have enough money to go to a gym, you can still go outside. You can still go for a walk. You can still go for a run. You can still be grateful that you have a body that can move. It's hard. And a lot of us have baggage that we didn't ask for, but that got put on us, you know, when we were kids or as we got older. But it's how we decide to manage it moving forward. Do we want to hold on to that baggage, or do we want to let some of it go? Some people, you hear about the stuff they've been through and you think, damn, how are you this positive, or how are you this okay? And then you see people that everything is like moan this, moan that. Well, it's hard to be around. And you think, and you have to live with yourself too. Like, that must feel horrible to feel so negative about everything. Like, I feel bad for you, because I'm here around you for 2 minutes and I'm like, oh, I feel horrible just being around that energy. And it does impact, again, it impacts their outcomes. It impacts how they progress with therapy. Like, at least in my specific area, it probably impacts the way people approach them as well. Even in a medical setting, it shouldn't, but sometimes it does. Whether we mean to or not, you know, biases happen, and avoidance tactics, you know, like, oh, I'm not ready for that today. You know, I'm not ready for that person's negativity, or I'm not ready for that loved one's inability to listen, or, you know, like, it does impact things. And I'm not trying to scaremonger anyone that watches this, but in terms of like being a patient, I'm also a huge advocate for patients speaking up for themselves, even if doctors poo-poo you, which happens far too much than it should, especially with women. But that's a different topic that I'm also super passionate about. But yeah, I think mindset is a huge thing. Connection is a huge thing. Movement is a huge thing. Failure is a learning moment. That's it. That's all it is. And I think if we start with mindset and just ignore that little voice in our minds that tries to tell us why we can't do this or why we can't do that or why this, why that, it'll paralyze all of us. But if you go, I hear you, Becky, but I don't have time for you right now. Like, let's park you to the side. I got to do this right now. I'll listen to you later. You know, we can do so much more.
What do you think people should go look at following this discussion?
Some people are in a place where they're ready to make a change, and some people kind of know it deep down but aren't there yet. So if this is a seed just to be planted in this conversation and the things we've discussed, that starts to bubble things up, questions to be asked oneself. You know, there's a lot of things I turn to for like mindset stuff. I've done a coaching diploma. So like if anyone listens to this and actually wants to do some work together, like I can provide that. I have a diploma as well as obviously my experience as a doctor. I'm happy for people to reach out to me. It just depends on what your needs are. Google is your friend, and social media can be a really powerful tool.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. And happy New Year.
Yeah. Cheers for making it to the end of this episode. If you enjoyed that one, I think you might like this one. And why not subscribe if you haven't already, so you never miss an episode again.